I love that component of the typically Eastern kind of concepts into a more Western version of success and manifestation.
Totally. I mean, Phil Jackson, head coach of the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers. And a lot of people go, oh, well, he had Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. It's like, no, they had him.
You're listening to Studio 22.
I love the prospect of this because a lot of what we do is show business.
Yeah.
And that's Peter Guber told us. He was like, I was like, we're sports entertainment. He was like, no, take it a step further. You're in the show business.
Nice.
100%.
So which way how many different ways are you attacking it as far as like?
I mean, I think if you understand show business, it's film, television, documentaries, books, podcasts, social media, network partner for live distribution, all that stuff. And so how are you delivering the most quality pound for pound per minute on any size screen? I think is one of the narratives that I often think about today versus, in a monolithic era of consumption. It's like, okay, we got to write a script, adapt it from a book, take it out, either deficit finance it or find a network to finance it, attach the right director or showrunner, actors, boom, make it. Loads going into marketing, try to drive box.
Yeah.
I long for those days, but it's just more complex. But the negative framework is, the movie business is going away, or people are cord cutting, broadcast is going away. The right way to frame it is consumption's going up. More people than ever are watching entertainment, film, television, docs. Yes, they're also watching social. It's incumbent on us to identify that social is a new medium and not the antithesis of film and television.
Oh yeah.
And broadcast is still what it was because it's over the air, funded by government. Cable is getting trimmed, but it's being accessed on streaming platforms. So it's up to leadership to figure out how to monetize.
I love what you said about consumption.
Are we in this right now, guys? Are we doing it?
We can just roll in for sure. I'll do an intro later. But you look at like Pierce Morgan and Will Kane are having on like YouTubers that specialize in entertainment in order to talk about the film industry.
Totally.
And they have millions of followers on YouTube, right? So it's like, I love that they're embracing it and not running from it, right? Like merging them and trying to figure out how to take advantage of that versus they're the enemy,
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
100%.
Jeremy Zimmer would say it's just attention's attention, and talent is talent.
Yeah.
There are new avenues to acquire or understand emerging talent, and that could be through creators now getting roles in films.
Yeah.
Or Justin Bieber getting found by Scooter Braun on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so
was just with Scooter.
Yeah. So like that, discovery has evolved with new technology and media, but, attention and consumption is still attention and consumption.
Yeah. You look at other platforms too, like merging Instagram and all that. They're doing that short form video, right? And it's like, okay, TikTok's doing that, so we are going to change. And YouTube has shorts that they're trying to push.
Yeah.
So they're all kind of, even with our comic books, right? Like we do a lot of comic books, and a lot of people don't really read comics as much, right? So like what we're trying to do is translate that into where the eyeballs are.
Yeah.
So we'll do like a short form video ad on social media, and that'll bring a lot more eyeballs than just selling a comic.
Yeah.
Right?
It's funny. Like I think it was Steve Jobs or someone's like, nobody reads books anymore.
Right.
But they get the material from the books either through audio versions or short snippets and, comics, right? Marvel was one of the greatest acquisitions of the last 2 decades by Disney. So we watch comics perhaps more than we read it. And then back to social, I think the greatest acquisition in media over the last 2 decades was Facebook acquiring Meta now acquiring Instagram for $1 billion.
Right.
And you could say Google acquiring YouTube for like whatever it was, 3 to 4 billion, which is like nothing
compared to
what the value of the platforms now.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
There's other companies too that I forgot the name. Was it like Quib or something like that? What was the
Quibi?
one?
Yeah.
The short form?
Where, it flopped, right? But they put $1 billion into that because they saw that's where the market was going. Now, maybe the timing was off or maybe the way that they executed it, but for someone to go in and invest $1 billion into short form content, it's very obvious where it's going.
Top tier executives launched a platform, 9:16 films or quality of film in under 10 minutes. Sometimes it's just ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Google Glass, we've seen iterations of it. Now the Apple Vision Pro, and it's still slightly ahead of its time.
Yeah.
The hardware is clunky, the tech isn't as seamless. And so it's not that it's a bad idea. It's just sometimes, and I think about that with lacrosse. Like, lacrosse has been around for thousands of years, created by the Native Americans, been played at the college level for 150 years. It's been played internationally. It was once at the Olympics in 1904, 1908. The pro game's been around for 20 years. It just, the pro game had the wrong operators, and it was a little too early because it was really difficult to penetrate the core four in a monolithic era without new technology and social media. The NFL, their breakout was in the 60s.
Yeah.
They harnessed television. Our breakout was in 2019, harnessing social media.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is timing meets tech, but the core principles are always the same when it comes to good storytelling.
I love seeing lacrosse get bigger too. I played from 4th grade to the end of high school, and like, such a great game.
I love that. Where'd you play? Did you grow up here?
I played in San Francisco, grew up there at private school, town school, and then went to CATE in Santa Barbara and played there. And then we played kind of, even though we were smaller, we played all the schools in kind of like the Southern California area.
Yeah. I mean, lacrosse is more akin to hockey and golf in America in that it's a stickball sport. It requires equipment, therefore it's expensive. The beauty in sport is that it is ultimately equal, and it is egalitarian only if anyone and essentially everyone can play. So once you introduce a barrier to enter,
right,
sort of cuts away at the egalitarianism of it. The only sport that I've left out is American football, that worked through former presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and the government and municipalities to fund rec peewee football. So if anyone grew up playing football, they got their pads for free and they had to turn them in at the end of the season. But football's fucking expensive.
Yeah.
Those helmets are more expensive than lacrosse helmets. If we had to all pay for our pads before we played football, no one would be fucking playing. And so football figured it out. We look at public and private financing and resourcing at the high school and below level. We don't have to pay for green fees or ice time like golf and hockey.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of, how do we get the game? You triggered me to have that thought, more played out west in the Bay and LA. We moved our headquarters here, try to establish more understanding and recognition and hype around this game that was once a Northeast game exclusively.
For sure. Yeah, we had one of our PE teachers kind of pioneered it and just brought it out to, like, we would do lacrosse camps and all that from starting at 4th grade. And like, it really did kind of have this resurgence all around the Bay Area, which was great.
I mean, PE is so important. Being able to buy a stick at Walmart or Target and go to the beach and not have to worry about like, oh, I just made a $50 investment. You can pick it up for $10. That's what we do when we play Frisbee or bring a squishy football or paddle ball out to the beach.
Right.
Think about that being so underrated for sport adoption at the competitive level. And then stuff that you guys do for a living. I to this day still think Mighty Ducks had a greater impact on the NHL in the 90s and 2000s than anything that the NHL did.
That's pretty true, yeah. I mean, anybody that never even watched hockey or anything that watched has seen that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still to this day probably the composition of the most diverse hockey team that ever stepped on ice.
Yeah.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah, and there were so many human stories in that. And what those kids did was play hockey. What Gordon Bombay did was play hockey and coach hockey.
Yeah.
Cool running. Same thing. If there was pro bobsledding, I would have been in America at the time. And then you have Rudy and Field of Dreams and Remember the Titans.
Love Remember the Titans.
Yeah.
We did our favorite sports films, like top 20 sports films or something of all time.
Yeah,
we did a
20.
fun episode about that. It was just cool to reminisce overall, kind of like our childhood favorites and go through that.
What was number one for you guys?
We had, was it Rocky?
Rocky.
Yeah.
I think it was Rocky.
Yeah. There's definitely a solid amount on that list. That was fun.
Friday Night Lights is probably
Friday
up
Nights,
there.
That was up there.
Shout out Pete Berg, who lives in the area.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the power of media, I mean, it's undeniable. And I think, we look at like the movie theater audience and kind of having a down year the last year or two, less films coming out, less television is coming out this year. Instead of 600 shows, they're doing 300 shows. But consumption is still going up. Like you said, it's just different areas. And we got to figure out how to harness that. Have you found in your businesses and your endeavors, like media is something that has really kind of helped the formation and guided the strategy?
100%. Always has in sports. I have some more to say about film and television, which I think it's actually more about protecting the art and really good storytelling, going back to our point, than it is around consumption, because it's really like, post Parasite, now we're actually seeing real box numbers of consumption of international features. I love foreign films, but they just didn't really make their way through the academies before. Like Victoria was the year before Parasite. It's my favorite film. German made film, single camera operator, single shot all the way through, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Fucking outstanding. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it on Amazon.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And then, you watch all the, like Another Round that came out in 2020, won the Palme d'Or. And I think we have to protect that. And we have to be very weary of, valuing young creators and their style of communication. Going back to Steve Jobs, he was always, to me, a creative and business leader, because he equally listened to what his customers want and also had the courage to say, this is what we believe you should be doing, and this is how you should be appreciating laptops and mobile devices. And yes, it's more expensive, but trust us on this. It's incumbent on storytellers and studios to protect that. On the sports side, there's been, I'll give you a few examples. There's been a big sort of swirl of conversation in journalistic sports around Drive to Survive and the impact that had on F1 in America. Drive to Survive wasn't novel. Hard Knocks has been doing it with the NFL and HBO. There was reality programming that uplifted Dana White and the Fertitta brothers in UFC called The Ultimate Fighter. They were $40 million in the hole. They did a time buy and paid to produce that reality show that they still have today.
It's a really good point.
Unscripted is a crucial part of storytelling, getting into the humanity of the players so that you can have a deeper connection and care more in the bottom of the fourth quarter, the bottom of the ninth inning when the game's on the line, and that player who now his backstory is taking that game-winning shot. And then we already talked about scripted, which I think scripted is going to have a comeback right now, because there's been this tilt of like, oh, everyone wants their Drive to Survive, and then they're rushing to produce it. Streamers had a lower supply than there was a demand. Now I think there's probably more supply. I mean, there's a Man City doc on Netflix, and Man City is one of the biggest, most exciting teams in the world.
Yeah.
And like no one's fucking watching it.
I want to check that out. I haven't even. Yeah.
And it's and then there's a cut of who the showrunner is, who the director is. That's really important. Yeah. I love Last Chance U because of Greg Whiteley. I think he tells stories better than anyone else. So like getting into that is arguably more important than getting into the space, like how the story is being executed. And that we found is our largest driver for metrics growth year over year, whether it's tickets or merchandise or sponsorship or youth.
I mean, that's such like a 360 view of everything, right? I mean, it's also like pretty representative of like everything you're involved in too, from the entrepreneurial side to the sports side and media side. That's really fascinating.
Did you have this passion for film before starting the PLL, or has it been something that's grown with you, or did you realize the importance of it and then have moved forward and dive deeper into the space?
It's interesting. It's evolved.
Yeah.
I've always had a passion for storytelling, when I graduated from Johns Hopkins, I was drafted into a league at the time called Major League Lacrosse. I was taken number 1 and given a $6,500 wage. And the games weren't distributed on television. 2 weeks earlier, I was playing in a national championship game in front of 55,000 people on ESPN, close to 1 million people watching. What the fuck happened?
Right.
But at my disposal was this thing called Facebook fan pages and YouTube. Instagram had yet to launch. Twitter had yet to launch, but they were right on the precipice. And so my belief was there are, case in point 2 weeks ago, a lot of lacrosse fans and a lot of interest in lacrosse that might not know what's going on at the pro level, but they know me from being on TV. So let me keep talking to them. So I started uploading and figuring out that medium, which I feel, native to. In a lot of ways, it's our unfair advantage compared to the leagues that were birthed on traditional media. So I think that my interest and passion has always been for storytelling. And as I've graduated to the next class and the next class, I've started really peeling back good storytellers and styles of storytelling. Quentin Tarantino isn't classically trained. He never went to film school. He just watched film.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that quote. He's like, you don't have to go to school. You don't have to, have the best equipment in the world. He's like, all you got to do is fucking love movies, and
movies. Yeah.
And go out and do it. Yeah,
love sports.
Yeah.
That's what Wayne Gretzky says. And I talk about him in my book, how insane he was about hockey and insane in the best way. And to this day, he still says he never practiced.
Yeah.
Because he associates practice with being asked to go out and do a number of reps and come back in with your report card. And he was like, I just fucking loved hockey.
Yeah.
And I was out there all the time. I had to be pulled in by my parents, brought my stick with me to my room, went to bed with it.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's that, maybe it sounds corny or something, but it's, you find what you love and you're passionate about, and you'll never work a day in your life,
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We were doing a podcast with Brett Hull, speaking of hockey, out in Nashville, and he was kind of saying the same thing with like practice in the game. He's like, but coach, like I'm going to score more goals in the game than everyone else. Like, why do I need to focus on practice? Right.
Yeah. And you have the Allen Iverson famous quote, practice. We talk about practice. And,
right.
But I will say both of those guys, to Wayne, to the way I view practice, is that the right practice, the key to practice is the practice away from practice. So we all think, okay, we're showing up in Nashville. I'm showing up in New York every day. AI's showing up in Philly every day, and you have your team practice. Your team practice is about the team. You're not getting many shots up. In lacrosse, you're maybe shooting 10 to 20 times in shooting drills at the start, and then you're working on offense and defense and riding and clearing, situational schemes. When you go away from practice, that's when you're getting up 100, 200 to 1,000 shots a day. That's when you're acquiring the real skill.
Right.
And the best athletes actually don't view that as practice. And I'm throwing that in air quotes because that's something that they just love doing.
It's a really good point too, because like I would lift a ton of weights, but I wouldn't do it during practice.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's just something I did.
Yeah.
But it helped my games. That's a really good point.
It's kind of the fucked up thing that, kids who are in sports now are being presented with is rec sports, club sports, tournaments every weekend, 5 games a weekend. So there's this volume of participation that is pulling them away from where the growth is, which is on their own.
Right.
And, Michael Jordan believes that the competitiveness of an athlete isn't as much just generational as people think, as it is volume of games. He was like, I played 12 games a season growing up. 12 games. So every game was more fucking important than it is if I'm playing 120 as that same 16-year-old. Because guess what? If you go to a tournament on a weekend, you lose the first game, you're still in it. We'll get them in 2 hours. It's just not the way we grew up.
Yeah.
Right.
That type of tension and stress and friction, that's valuable.
Yeah, I think our lacrosse season was like 14 games, something like that. Yeah.
And I say that in my book as my intention is for the next generation of athletes, and the lessons that they can get is It's like the difference between me and you is that I didn't have social media or a mobile phone attached to my hip. I know the pressures that brings.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck, man, it's hard. I can't imagine being 12 to 16 with that level of distraction.
Yeah.
And the other is
And also
privatized sports.
Yeah.
Which is, changed the nature of the way that we competed. It's not a bad thing. It's just different.
Yeah. Figuring out the landscape, and is part of that change what inspired you to write the book? Kind of like figuring out the new landscape?
Some of it. Yeah. I think everything we do, I mean, you guys deciding to do this podcast together is probably an amalgamation of reasons. I think at my core, I'm just curious. So studying film, studying pro sports, studying art, studying music, learning from the best at what they do, bestowed on me probably from my dad, who always encouraged me to ask questions. But I always took it a step further because I grew up struggling in the classroom. I had certain learning differences that slowed me down. And my learning loop was consuming information, writing it down, then sharing it with someone else. We often miss the second and third step, but more frequently the third.
Yeah.
That to me goes short-term, long-term memory. And so I have these, dozens and dozens of journals with inspirational quotes, or, I get to sit down with Steph Curry or Sue Bird or Dwayne Johnson, Tom Cruise. They share something with me because I've been fortunate to be at the top in my industry. You get to meet others in the top of theirs, and I go back and write it down. And one of our investors in the PLL is one of my favorite writers, and Ryan Holiday.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I got his books. Yeah.
And Ryan actually emailed me, knocked on the door, and was like, "Have you considered writing a book based on the stuff that him and I talk about in back alley?" And I was like, "No." He was like, "Why not?" And I was like, "I don't think anyone would want to read it." And he was like, "That's exactly why you should." Because most people think whatever they have to say, everyone wants to hear.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Let me help you construct this." So I have to give a shout out to Ryan because he was a huge creative consultant throughout the process.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's the saying, success leaves clues. If you want to be successful, the fastest way to get there is to follow someone's path who's already done it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been fascinated with since I can't remember. It started off with the Tony Robbins books, right? And then you kind of dive deeper. And I got this book I absolutely love by U.S. Anderson. They say it's like the origin is written in the 50s called 3 Magic Words. But before The Secret, it's a secret before the secret. It's all these other books in the beginning era. And so I just kept going farther and farther back in time. And you realize, it's the mentality, it's your perception of reality, it's how you react to things, it's all of these things put together. And then the people that are at the highest level, exactly what you said is exactly what I do. And I think anybody that wants to be a better version or the best version of themselves is going to take these things, these little it's quotes, it's habits, it's all these things, and then you put them into yourself. It's Tony Robbins, when I was 18, is the first thing I learned. He's like, your brain is like a computer. You can reprogram it. And is that what you're sharing in your book?
100%.
Yeah.
So I think about stillness. Ryan Holiday's one of his books called Stillness is the Key.
He leads me beside still waters right here.
I love that.
Yeah.
And what I found writing the book, and what I found over a decade or so of meditating and being in therapy or just sitting still, is that there is no coincidence in life. There's connective tissue that if we're still enough, we identify, right? Your tattoo you just shared with me, we're sitting here still. That's a connective point. You played lacrosse. Tony Robbins, you're telling me, was an inspiration. He was an inspiration to me, which I'll tell my second point around my belief in manifestation. I had him on my podcast. I never met Tony before.
Yeah.
But the idea that I could figure out a way to get to him, and if I was thoughtful enough and poached him at the right time, that we'd build a relationship. And so whether it's Muhammad Ali and the era of athletes that had the courage to say, I am the greatest, I believe that courage allows you to become. And that's also a missing ingredient coming back to social media and the mobile devices today, is we see fewer and fewer athletes willing to have that courage to believe, say, do. And whether it's Muhammad Ali, whether it's Tony Robbins talking about rewiring the way that we think, whether it's Ryan Holiday talking about how stillness brings us to consciousness, those are all parts of my own self-discovery, things that I've done in my life, and then not coincidentally, others have found as well.
I love that component of the stillness, awareness, consciousness. I love Eckhart Tolle. Like I read a lot of his stuff, The Power of Now, The New Earth. And I love hearing that you're kind of incorporating those typically Eastern kind of concepts into a more Western version of success and manifestation, because I think it's really important for people to learn those concepts and understand them.
Totally. I mean, Phil Jackson, winner of 11 rings, got a great book called 11 Rings. Head coach of the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers. And a lot of people go, oh, well, he had Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. It's like, no, they had him.
Right.
But there was an alchemy where they were searching for each other. Phil brought a lot of Eastern culture and indigenous beliefs into sport. And the fundamental idea that he had is one that I'm often scratching my head around when I'm seeing games where it's in the NBA, the NFL, the PLL, college lacrosse, is your game day is about winning. And we know as athletes, you're at your best when you're feeling confident. And the source of confidence, like our parents, is also our coaches. On game day, if you're going to be fucking critical of your players, they're not going to be confident, you're less likely to win.
Right.
That doesn't mean you can't be critical and helpful and give feedback. Leave that for practice. Phil Jackson was always like, all right, he's known as the Zen master. I'm going to get my team to meditate before practice or before warm-ups. We're going to go out there. And then my job is to just be their partner during the game, help them when they're challenged, push them with confidence, and we're going to win more.
That's such a great mentality. And I didn't grow up playing sports, but just hearing that.
Why not? You could have played in the fucking NFL.
No, I moved around too much, man. Yeah. I switched high schools 9 times, middle school 6. I just never had any consistency in that space. But I did find working out. And so I stuck with that. But yeah, that mentality of you've done all the work, now just show up and do what you're supposed to do, right? During the game. Like I think that hearing that from you, it seems more clear than getting hounded, because you see it all the time with kids, man. I've been in plenty of kids games and they get beat up by the coaches or yelled at by the parents, and then they crumble, and then, their confidence is just getting less and less, and then they're not performing right. And it's not that it's any different. We get more resilient as we get older, I believe, but even as a professional athlete, hearing that, getting something in your ear, or you get stuck in your head, I can imagine that playing over and over, and it's like, I missed the most important shot, now I suck, like I can imagine
totally
having someone like Phil, right? Someone like you leading your way would make all the difference.
I mean, the voices we hear inside our head are the worst.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are telling us we suck, that we're too old, that we need to give up, that no one wants to read our book.
Yeah.
And those are often framed negatively when someone does give up. But when those achieve, especially under the framework of proving people wrong, it's that same voice. It's just treating it in a way where you become the commander. It's like, I was recruited to a school that had 4 straight #1 recruiting classes, and I was a #3 player in the country. And a lot of people told me, why would you go to Johns Hopkins? You're not going to play. I could have been like, yeah, I'm not going to play. And that could have manifested, and I could have been a player for 4 years who didn't play. I used it as motivation to prove them wrong. So that's sort of part one. The other part is going back to coaching and even systems, is how are we setting ourselves up for success? We're often goal oriented around things going well, but in life, things don't go as planned, especially in games. I want to win a championship at the end of the season, be MVP, first team All-Pro, All-Star, score 3 goals, 3 assists every game. So I've got a fairly in-tune analytical mind. I'm going to break that down by every shift on the field. And now I'm taking myself out of the present moment of just playing. And more times than not, as I said, things don't go as planned. And then what happens is we begin to downward spiral. The sport that I love around goal setting is golf.
Yep.
Golf has what's called an up and down. They have a player Phil Mickelson, who's the second highest grossing player on the tour behind Tiger Woods, won loads of majors, incredible talent, but he's known for his flop shot out of the gravel over a tree that lands on the green and he putts in and saves par. What people don't say in golf is he had a really shitty tee shot. How else is he ending up in the gravel? And so you celebrate the way that you respond. And that is amazing. So finding your up and down in whatever it is you do is something that I think about. Don't allow the bad tee shot compound into other bad shots.
Yeah. I love that. One of my favorite quotes is life isn't what happens to you, it's how you react to it.
100%.
Yeah. So those reactions and how we show up that's everything.
Yeah. And the sadistic part of life is that if we believe that and if we put everything we can into the way that we react, those are the moments where we end up growing the most. Therefore, the thing that happened to us, the loss, the pain, the injury was actually the most valuable.
Yeah. I mean, that's when you learn, that's when you grow, right?
Yeah.
Who would you say has been the biggest influence in your life?
Well,
and I know obviously it's been multiple, right?
Yeah.
And different people for different reasons.
I think it comes at different times too, and having the awareness to say, oh man, I wouldn't have inched anywhere close to where I am today without the way that my parents raised me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing in my career now without an older brother who's my co-founder of the PLL who drives me. I wouldn't have developed the competitiveness and the drive had I not committed to that school whose head coach had recruited 4 previous number 1 classes. I mean, he was a competitive motherfucker. And I picked up a lot of that. I wouldn't have been able to soften with more perspective had I not lost a world championship game in 2014, then broken my foot the week after. That got me into sports psychology, then therapy. And then you start growing in a more well-rounded way where lacrosse no longer was my identity. It just happened to be what I did. So I think the goal for me is holding on to those really important relationships is what I try to remind myself to do more regularly, whether it's a simple text message or phone call or writing a letter of gratitude. And then, by the way, you know, the saying goes is you're the combination of the 5 people you spend most time with. Those 5 people, because of technology, don't have to be people in the flesh.
Yeah.
It could be, you know, reading memoirs of Winston Churchill and, you know, listening to your podcast every day and, you know, spending a lot of time with your head coach after practice, who's probably not your best friend, but you can figure out how to put together a really good 5.
I like that. That's actually, I've never heard anybody say that before. So that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, because when you hear that, you always think of like literally being with someone or.
Well, and the reason for that too, you know, is because we're habitual creatures, right? We're going to pick up the habits of the people around us. But if you're studying someone who may not even be living anymore, right? But Marcus Aurelius or whoever it may be, it's you will pick up that line of code and adopt it to yourself, right? So your whole life. Have you read the book, The Powerful Engagement?
I haven't.
Yeah, Tony Schwartz, you mentioned sports psychology, and I love this book, man. So through reading and studying other, you know, people in that self-help space, I found this book, and it basically takes the highest level athletes, breaks down what they do, and then applies it to the everyday person to make them better. And it's about your habits, what you do habitually. And one of the examples he gave was the number 1 and number 2 tennis player. The difference between the best and the second best was literally the first person could just rest a little bit better in between the set. That 90 seconds, I think, that they have. So slowing his heart rate down and you know, getting ready for the next one. But taking those moments of rest in your day-to-day, you have an hour on, take 5 minutes to yourself, listen to a song, get a protein shake, do whatever it is, makes you, instead of doing the 8 hours straight, makes you more productive, makes you more effective. And then surrounding yourself with these people too. They give a great example, and I'll shut up after this, is there was a husband who had a wife and a kid, and he had a friend who was a loser. And his friend played video games, drank, talked about women, and you know, did things that were not good. He spent enough time with this guy. He started playing the video games, slacking off from work, 100%. Not being a good husband, you know, talking about other women, doing this stuff. And then eventually it led to Well, now he's getting a divorce and he's not going to see his kid and all these other things fall out, but he became the loser on the couch. So really choosing how you show up in the world, who you surround yourself with, and recognizing that as well. One thing, and I want to pivot over to this too, because you mentioned the identity, who you are outside of lacrosse. I hear that with a lot of athletes. And again, I didn't get to play, but their entire life becomes whatever sport, because morning, noon, and night, from breakfast to the second they close their eyes, it's all that sport, right? And then it's dictated for them. Like, you know where to go for practice, you know what to eat and all that stuff. So finding that identity, was that a difficult process for you, or is it something that came more naturally, you think?
Getting into therapy felt to me like your earlier question of studying film. When I find something that is explorative, that is intellectually engaging, that I can feel myself improving in, I go all in.
Nice.
So I think that whether it is evolving as an athlete and as a human being, as an individual, that's the goal. Your earlier notes resonated with me because the beauty in books and meeting new people and conversations, you pick up things that work for them. But there's no such thing as a blueprint for anyone to follow. And that was something that I was reminding myself when I was attempting to write this book, is that the answers aren't in a straight line. So my goal was to think through what you had said, which is the evolution of me as a human came at the time that the universe needed it to come at. The singular focus of an athlete where the sport is their identity, that works. And what I used to ask my sports psychologist was, is it possible to have both? And he was like, yeah, of course. And let's work on that. And I used to say, well, it's hard for me to turn the light switch on and off and be the ruthless competitor, tough teammate, impossible opponent to deal with on the field. And then boom, locker room, be a good guy, be a nice guy. Right.
Yeah.
So I learned that it's a dial. Right. And that to me resonated more. On the lessons front, I talk about two of the greatest footballers of all time are Pele and Tom Brady. And their ways of getting prepared for a game couldn't have been more opposite.
Yeah.
Pele meditates. He'd lay down on a bench and put a cold towel over his eyes and think about the ball hitting his foot in the back of the net. He needed to get he needed to relax, per that note that you shared. Tom Brady actually found the most valuable thing for him is anger, because it heightened his senses and his focus, and he was a better quarterback as a result, whether he manufactured that anger or it was in the newspaper clippings. Two opposite approaches. One guy's pissed and the other guy's kind of calm and happy. One guy won 3 World Cups, the other guy won 7 Super Bowls. So I like to share different sort of avenues to accomplishing the same thing, so that the reader, the first books that I used to read were Goosebumps. It's like sort of choose your destination. That's what I hope I could accomplish when I went out and wrote different lessons, knowing that there is no blueprint. We all grow up differently and have different motivations and different experiences and lose at different times, get injured at moments, etc.
I love that, like studying, because everything's going to be unique to the person who's trying to achieve that growth, right? Like, you want to do it a way that's comfortable to you. I'm doing and it even works in other avenues. Like, I'm doing a 50-book challenge right now in sci-fi, fantasy, classics, like dating all the way back to like 1920s Soviet Union books. However, I chose sci-fi fantasy because our comics are sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah.
So I'm like basically wanting to learn from these Hugo award-winning authors throughout the 20th century. And like, some have these really long, beautiful prose that are like amazing to read. And then some are like very sarcastic and short-witted, like a Vonnegut, Sirens of Titan by Vonnegut. Like, couldn't be more different than like a Roadside Picnic or something like that. So like, I'm basically going through it to try to pick and choose different writing styles that I can then apply to my writing. So like, it all kind of just goes together of this like cycle of growth I was trying to pursue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. We're not inventors, we're chemists. And we pull things that make sense for us from others who were great at whatever it is that they do.
Yeah.
Lacrosse found me late relative to when you think about athletes who achieve a certain standard. I started playing in middle school. I had been playing basketball, soccer, I swam, track and field. I was always a talented athlete, but because I started those other sports earlier, I was better at them. Lacrosse was really challenging, and I stuck with it largely because my mom taught me the discipline and the commitment that was required to getting through the first season. And then once I got through the first season, I started getting a little bit better. But I reference that because I started adding a crossover dribble into my split dodge in lacrosse, my field awareness from soccer into my ability to see the next play in lacrosse. The way that Steph Curry would practice from inside the paint is the way that I would start my practice close to the net. So these were things that were not instilled in me by my middle school or high school coach. It was just watching others. I loved watching Reggie Bush and the way that he would return punts at USC, how he cut the field and changed trajectories. Barry Sanders. And I would just think about the game differently, which it sounds a lot like what you do. And that's what the great storytellers are able to do. George Lucas designed his films and his characters based off of those huge, San Francisco Bay Area ports, right? And so what resonates for you, how do you then apply it? And that's the best we can do is sharing our authentic connections with the rest of the world.
I love that. 100%. It's there's so many different forms of that. I like hearing how you did that in lacrosse, because my number one move was as in crease attackman was literally, if someone's guarding me, my the ball's at X behind the goal, it's one jab step and then the other way, and without the ball, right? Moving without the ball. There's no way that defender can even predict or guard that if you're that quick in cutting, and then you have a wide open cut to goal and it's boom, quick stick, you're in.
Yep.
And there's nothing more I took that from football, being a running back. So it's just that one step off ball. He can't predict it. He can't react in time. And
Exactly. Because most people will say, well, you cut and get open when your teammate draws a double team and your defender leaves you. It's see the back of his helmet, cut. And that's the way I always used about cutting. And I wasn't a good off-ball goal scorer. And then someone introduced me the concept of just dodging by your defender even without a ball, and then you're open and someone will pass it to you.
Right.
Holy shit.
Oh wow.
And so that's the beauty in books and storytelling at large is we can just do these little unlocks along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Super powerful.
Yeah. Is there it's funny because when you mentioned the gauge, right? For me, as an actor, I'm thinking about turning it on, turning it off, right? You got to become a completely different person. Is there, as you're pursuing the film, TV, and more of the content for the PLL and everything else you're doing, do you have any interest in acting? Because I feel like it'd be an easy shoe-in for you in some of your projects.
I don't know.
Just with what you're sharing mentally.
Yeah. I mean, here's my just real perspective on it. And I get it if people disagree or what have you. There have been some phenomenal crossover athletes into acting or entertainers into acting. I have a lot of respect for actors. I understand the commitment to the work and the soft skills and the subtleties and the empathy that shows up on screen. Being able to relax, understanding marks and relax with a crew on you. The way that I've approached the life is, if I wanted to pursue acting, I would have to go all in. And I believe that my place in storytelling now is on the producing side, on the writing side, potentially directing one day. I have maybe a better relationship than most with talent, having been on the field. It wasn't for me in this life. It doesn't mean I wouldn't be okay at it, but I kind of have this reverence for different folks in different industries. And it's really what the best entrepreneurs can do is you hear like hire people who are smarter than you.
Yeah.
Learn how to delegate, learn how to nourish and appreciate. And that's, me sort of adhering to the lessons that most resonate for me.
I mean, that's such a testament to your mentality too, is and the self-awareness that you have is, where you'd best serve moving forward in that space, right?
Yeah.
I was saying for me, I think the better you are at studying, at basically becoming an investigative reporter at that point, the better of an actor, and then empathy as well.
Totally.
And just being able to listen.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned all these things in the podcast. So I'm just saying that's where my head is going to go as somebody who is an actor, right?
That's why I love actors.
Yeah.
I think they dive into the research and the characters, and they do dream work, and they have dialect coaches. It's very similar to sports.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the training for some of the roles are equal. Look at what Jake Gyllenhaal does with Roadhouse, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And look, if Pete wants to cast me in, a locker room scene for his next sports film, I think I could like bring some heat to that.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And then start to slowly see, okay, this is how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
But I know it's complicated, and it's brilliant the way that talent is able to bring a story on screen to life.
That's awesome.
And you've done like on-screen broadcasting work, of course, right? So you're like,
I fancy myself sort of as like a chameleon.
yeah.
And I try to check that more now that I'm 38 and just kind of got this like restart and on life and this passion for it. But when I was doing broadcasting, I would talk like a broadcaster, and just and it wasn't me. Those that are classically trained to be on NBC and call a game, like they're so good, and that's their passion, that's their love. So yeah, I guess it's a similar note, and also realizing to acting, and also realizing that that's what entrepreneurs do, is they some could say fake it, and others could say they're really adaptable. So how athletes are too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. If I'm gonna do it, I gotta go all in.
All
so
in.
I'm like, yeah, that's great.
I think one of the greatest skill sets you can have is that authenticity that you bring to the world, and being your own unique self. There is nobody else that's like you, right? So being that version and showing up in the world, that translates, and that's the kind of stuff that goes on to athletes that are coming after you, people that are sitting listening to this podcast, right? That's the stuff that I feel now more than ever people need and want.
Yeah.
Back before we could fake it till you make it, but now when you sit down with someone for 3 hours in a podcast, you're like, someone's going to crack. You see something where it's not authentic and it doesn't resonate the same. So the things that you're sharing and talking about and your journey, to me, you being your authentic self is only going to resonate more, which is more even exciting knowing you have this book, The Way of the Champion, right? That people can now go read and digest and take pieces of that and bring them into their own life. So, I mean, my hat's off to you, dude. Like it's cool to see what you're doing, and it's inspiring, and it's not an easy task,
I think the path to authenticity must include vulnerability and awareness and the ability to share, kind of going back. And, I say that because the things that I struggled with the most and still struggle with today, I growing up, watching the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, seeing entrepreneurs like Mark Cuban and Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg, I would have never, thought that I wanted to be a professional lacrosse player and start a professional lacrosse league. It just to me, I understand sort of the history of lacrosse and the perception of lacrosse and the size and scale of lacrosse. And I'm an ambitious dude. And so I share that because I struggled with it. Lacrosse found me, and I built a relationship with it, and I fell in love with it, and I couldn't let it go. And so then I was hell bent on trying to figure it out professionally as an athlete, now professionally as the entrepreneur, as a storyteller. And and knowing that, like, I share that because it's just a rocky road. Everything that we do, and consistent with what we've been sharing, that means you're onto something. There must be friction.
Yeah. I mean, I think I always say, like, authenticity is the currency of the future. And I think the reason YouTube and those alternative forms of media have grown so much is because you're literally like a guy or a woman in their office with like this little face cam can have millions of people watching them because they're being their authentic selves.
Yeah.
And they're giving authentic opinions. And that's what people are missing in media or, more traditional forms, is that straight up authenticity. And I think they're finding that on YouTube or on social media more than kind of traditional outlets.
Yeah.
Obviously there's exceptions and, for both types, but
I like to say, assume you're not the exception. Assume you're not the NFL. Assume you're not Taylor Swift, and assume that you won't be an overnight success. I don't believe in overnight successes, by the way. Every company that we've heard of that's had an exit has at least 10 years of build ahead of it. Athletes to become NBA or PLL champions must be playing for at least 20 years. And we have these tipping point moments where press covers us and you're on national television scoring a goal in overtime, leading your team to the trophy. But all the stuff that went into that is in direct conflict with instant gratification, which is largely how these social media platforms are wiring us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, be your authentic self on your webcam and commit to that. Don't look at the fucking ticker of how many people who you've never met before are actually watching.
Right.
Yeah.
If what you're sharing on that webcam is something that you care about, keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it.
Yeah, and starting a new league in this new era, I mean, you have this unique opportunity to, like you said, like integrate social media and integrate that authenticity into it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not, you can break down a lot of those barriers and, have more fan interaction and have more player media going on with social and all
Totally.
that. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it's the difference between searching for outside validation and inside being validating yourself, essentially, right? But what was for me, what's different about the PLL and other leagues, and why did you start it?
Yeah, so sort of the chemist, not inventor approach. So we sat back and went, all right, if Major League Baseball was starting in 2018 versus the early 1900s, how would they structure it? We've learned so many war stories of leagues expanding too fast, contracting. 200 sports leagues have started since 1990 with a 1% success rate. And that's being able to sustain beyond 3 years of play. So you have to be very proficient in the way that you are building. You have to have an efficient cost structure. You have to be able to present as if you are 20 years down the road in year one, because people are going to spend their hard-earned cash to get in a car with their family, pay for 5 tickets, pay for parking, pay for concessions, sit in the heat in the summer and watch a 90-minute match. Right? So that the what you have to provide has to be top class. It's an exceptional exercise of grit and imagination. And so through that, we said, okay, kind of, we're occupying a team sport, but from a business standpoint, I love individual sports. Love the UFC, love F1, love the WWE, and I'm talking about business. They golf, tennis, right? Having majors, getting all the best players in one market with your one network partner. There's no overlap in games competing between when OKC's playing and the Knicks are playing on a Thursday night. Like, everything is there in front of you. Your sponsors, your fans, get everyone in one fell swoop. How could we build that in team sports? That's why we launched our touring model.
That's awesome.
We started with 6 teams because we felt like that was enough based on the total allotment of talented players from the previous league, and not too much, such that our costs were really high and the stories were too spread thin. And then, we utilized social media. which baseball started with print and radio,
Right.
and a very local mindset from how you grew up, where you stayed, where you worked was the same. Tickets was the number one revenue stream in the early 1900s, which meant how many games you should have, which is why baseball plays 10,000 games a season.
Right.
Then as media introduced itself, and after the NFL, by the way, made the bet that Major League Baseball didn't, which was, we believe our games on television won't impact tickets. That's why Major League Baseball fell off, is they were like, nah, if we go on air, people aren't going to attend games. And football then got the broadcast deals with ABC and NBC and CBS. Then baseball tried to catch up, but it was too late. So we looked at, okay, the exposure you get from television will provide a validating point of view for new fans, because pro lacrosse hadn't been on NBC or ABC like we ended up getting it to. We know we're not going to get paid a lot for that in year one because pro lacrosse has never delivered a rating. So how do we figure out the economics?
Right.
And with social media, how do we build a very sticky and growing monetizable audience by having conversations with them daily? So seeing sort of the history of sports, trying to be predicative of where the future of sports is going, raising the right long-term capital, and then ultimately, I think the key ingredients for pro sports, and the same thing in film and television, is you have to have top-tier talent. You have to have the best players in the world. It's something that MLS and Don Garber still struggles with. They get Messi over, they got Beckham over, they had Thierry Henry at some point. We have great homegrown talent in the US, but they're mostly playing overseas. So how do you harness what sport is essentially asking the three of us to do on a Saturday afternoon? If we're not watching the best at what they do, I'm not going to watch. Spring football has struggled with that. Football is so big in America that they're able to peel off a pretty sizable audience by just showing up. But you've got to have the best in the world. And then what I'll say to wrap on the program itself, why it's so valuable and why it continues to hold up broadcast and cable, is that it's live, and the vast percentage of sports fans prefer to watch games live versus on repeat, which means it's appointment watching, which was a huge disruptor from DVR to streaming, is that the power shifted from the networks delivering cheers to 84 million people on a finale at Thursday night at 7:00 to now being like, no, I want to watch Succession when I want to fucking watch it. And if it's good enough, I'm going to watch it on Sunday night, but like, I don't have to. Right. So the power has shifted to the consumer. Sports holds on to it because of live. Also, what's really valuable about live is advertisers want to be where fans are. And so they can count on being in properties where there are authentic integrations, quarters, timeouts, reviews, on-field signage. Streaming essentially has created a tax on advertising where like we don't have to watch commercial breaks anymore.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So, so I think that's that. And then the last piece that I really enjoy about sports is that none of us know how it's going to end. And that is like the ultimate form of suspense and original programming.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. It's true.
That's awesome.
That's crazy. I mean, you look at all those different financial variables that go into like a full league. It's like it can make your head spin.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does a lot of times. That's why we have a great team. And we're constantly thinking about the next 30 days and the next 3 years, then the next 30 years. And how do we identify areas of growth and keep this thing moving?
Hell yeah.
Have you guys
really
ventured pretty heavily into the merchandise space? Or?
Yeah. And you know, that's the other thing. So we're a true single entity league. The NFL, the NBA, they're associations. So essentially the commissioner's office does two things. It cuts the national broadcast deal and a few other national sponsors, and then manages the owners and makes sure like the ship keeps moving in the right direction. But the owners are operating their teams on a week-to-week basis. So we're an attractive model to venture capitalists because we own the whole thing, which means the league IP, all of our 8 teams IP, marketing rights to players, signage on site, inventory online. But the challenging part is we got to operate the whole fucking thing. So every game we're operating, we don't get to outsource it to Mark Cuban or, Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
So the exciting path is always the harder path. And so you have to have the stomach for it. You have to have the resilience and the endurance, and know that, it's going to do this.
Oh yeah.
Bit.
Yeah.
And are you doing a lot of like college recruitment so that every year you're getting the top All-Americans from the top universities?
We actually have our draft this coming Tuesday. So I'm going to fly to New York on Sunday, and then we do our draft live at ESPN. So that'd be great. Yeah, that was a big part of our initial strategy is owning the college pipeline and the college draft and making sure we get that right. So you'll have 4 rounds and the best college players will be selected, and then they'll be playing in June with us.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of cap on the amount of teams that you guys can bring on eventually as you move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that has to be carefully mined. So, you could expand too fast. You could also expand with the wrong owners. So if we were to go from 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 or 8 to 16 teams, the touring model has to shift to probably a home and away model. Because bringing 16 teams into one market and everyone playing, I don't think people have the stomach to watch 8 games over the course of a weekend, or we really don't have the air time to do it. So we're really focused right now on continuing to drive value through our 8 teams, like F1's 10 teams. And then if we were to expand teams, understanding, okay, who are the owners in those markets that own venues that can put a really great experience out, that care about lacrosse, care about investing in the players and the fans. If you find more than 8 of those, and then more than 16 or 30, like some leagues, then there's a really great value proposition on the other side of pursuing it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a version of you that's playing for you guys right now? Is there a Paul out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do. We've got one of the greatest players to have played in Tom Schreiber, who was last year's MVP and world champion, and then Trevor Baptiste was the MVP before him. Zed Williams was the MVP before that. So he's exciting pro talent that is taking the game to new heights. And then we have a few really talented players coming out of college that will go 1, 2, and 3, and Brennan O'Neill, Pat Cavanaugh, and Connor Schellenberger. So incumbent on us to help them grow into the spotlight.
Hell yeah.
You mentioned Travis Pastrana, and I grew up skateboarding, surfing, motocross. I did like all the stuff outside of team sports, really. But I've seen this evolution since I was a kid. We kind of all watched it across every sport, whether it's extreme sports, traditional, team sports, whatever it is. How much have you seen, or do you think you've seen a massive change in the way people approach the game and play since you started, or even since however many decades it goes back? Right?
Yeah, I mean, on the business side, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Allen & Co., Moelis, LionTree, they all have sports practices because sports are now considered a primary asset class. So banks are trying to get their high net wealth individuals on the ownership side. Private equity is now being carved into ownership deals via the NFL, the NBA. We have a big private equity shop that are great investors on our board in Arctos. David O'Connor was a co-founder of that. He was a partner at CAA for 20 years here.
Nice.
So I think the sophistication and the enterprise value is at a level that sport never had. It used to be considered a vanity play for someone who was really rich to go own a team and invite their friends into their suite. Now it's like, wow, if you look at the impact on media, on advertising, the ticketing revenue, is the same as the past, meaning you can sell however many tickets the venue can hold over the course of however many games you're playing in a season. But merchandise, to your earlier note, that's a 24/7, 365 business because of new technology and creative marketing campaigns. And youth has gotten big. Real estate, they own venues. They're now bolting on hotels and retail and restaurants, and that's creating more value under the larger Topco umbrella. So that's significantly changed. And I think some of it has been in the air for parents and kids that wasn't there for me growing up. And maybe it was just in the bubble that I grew up in, where my dad was never like, oh yeah, you're going to play college sports or pro ball. And it was like he always says it. He wanted to be able to get me into any sport that I wanted to play. And that happened to be rec. But if I wanted to swim, he would try to figure out how much paper he had to sell. He was a paper salesman to get me in, or be able to drive me to my swim lessons.
That's cool.
Parents and kids now, man, it's like everyone's like, I need to get a Division I scholarship. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, if there was a Division I athlete at my school growing up, everyone would be like, oh, like if he was good enough in football, you might see Nick Saban in the hallway, or Dean Smith in basketball, and that, like, it was almost, maybe people just were more realistic than they are now. So I think there's some stuff that needs to be managed because the youth sports business has gotten so big. I think it's like a $60 billion industry in the US. So crazy. To be able to drive those dollars, I think a lot of the youth operators are pushing the ability to get any kid recruited because of the relationship with the coach.
Yeah.
That needs to be navigated.
Interesting.
100%. You're doing so many cool things though, right?
Thanks.
Like, I mean, the pro leagues, the book, like we can approach it from like the mental angle on the book side, and then the business kind of more material angle from that. I mean, it's really, really cool. Congrats on everything.
Thank you. I mean, I wrote the book in 3 sections. There's amateur, professional, and beyond the game.
That's awesome.
Some of the lessons, as you can imagine, reoccur, like work ethic and camaraderie and leadership. And then some of them evolve. So as an amateur, it's really, amateur actually comes from the Latin word amator, which means lover of, enthusiast of. So it's a reminder, like, you're doing something because you love it. You're finding that sport. And then profession is more professing to your calling. And that takes on a whole nother life. It's often not discussed, by the way, because of the rat race to getting into pros, and then everyone leaves you alone. And then once you retire, a lot of athletes, really struggle, and entertainers and so on and so forth, because if you haven't upkept your relationship with self, you lost a large portion of that. I've learned that beyond the game is very much about service and ingenuity and community. And that could be through the lens of rebuilding pro lacrosse. It could be starting a foundation. It could be both. But those experiences, some of my own, a lot, mostly of others that I've studied, is how I think about my day to day. And where I've learned is, like, I'm project based, and I don't like to be told I can't do something.
Yeah.
And I like to take on things that I haven't been classically trained to do, like writing a book or doing a film or, launching a league.
Hell yeah. And now acting.
Yeah, maybe acting.
Yeah, we'll get you in something. No, man, that's awesome. I appreciate you. Where can everyone find your book?
So you can buy my book anywhere come May 7th, depending on when this podcast drops. So it could be Amazon, it could be Walmart, it could be Barnes & Noble. It could be my local bookstore in New York, PNT Knitwear. You can find all those selections on thewaveofthechampion.com. You can follow me on social media. I'm at Paul Rabil. And, really, I was hoping we'd come into this podcast and talk enough about the book so that you felt like you didn't need to buy it. And then it's your choice. And I think that's, genuinely my hope.
That's awesome.
We can't force anyone to do anything.
No, and I think anybody who's genuinely listening to this, like myself included, it only makes me want to read it and take more out of that book than what you've already shared, which is so beneficial to anybody I feel that's listening, especially trying to be a better version of themselves. So where's my signed copy, bro?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to get pissed off at my publisher.
No, you're good. You're good. No, man.
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate you coming
so
on.
much
Man.
for coming.
You all. Yeah.
Thank you for watching Studio 22.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
And follow our socials at Studio 22 Podcast.